Hi, Edna Moyle Primary School. It's Katie here from the Central Caribbean Marine Institute, so I can talk to you about the answers to all of your questions from our Reefs Go Live broadcast yesterday. And I have to say, you students had the most questions by far of any other school who was interacting with us, so well done. Bear with me here because you have about 15 to get through. So, your first question was, how does pollution affect the symbiotic relationship of the coral? Now, I did talk about this on the broadcast yesterday, so you may remember me saying that if pollution settles onto the reef like a plastic bag or maybe a big net, it'll block out that sunlight so that zooxanthellae that has the symbiotic relationship won't be able to convert that sunlight into energy for the coral. So pollution is a pretty negative effect for coral on the reef, and especially their symbiotic relationship with that zooxanthellae. You also wanted to know where the largest coral is located on Cayman's reefs, and I gotta tell you guys, I don't know. I've not yet been lucky enough to dive every inch of Cayman's coral reefs. I'm trying, but I haven't gotten to it yet. The biggest coral I've seen so far was a 20-foot tall Dendrogyrus cylindrus or pillar coral, and that was a really impressive coral. Can fish cause damage to the corals? I think that you're probably thinking about parrotfish. Parrotfish are an herbivore, meaning they are trying to eat the algae off of the coral reef. But every once in a while, they will eat the coral that's on the reef as well. They're trying to get that zooxanthellae, or that algae living inside those polyps. That's what they're trying to eat when they're eating the coral by accident. So they do kind of scrape and scar the coral a little bit, but it's such a small effect that it really doesn't harm the coral reef overall. It's just a very little bit that grows back pretty quickly, if I'm honest. And your next question was, from year 4 at Edna Moyle Primary School, do we have a lot of corals that are dying on our reef? Unfortunately, we did just have a 20-year survey wrap up last year in 2018, and compared to 20 years ago, the coral cover throughout the Cayman Islands used to be about 20% coral cover, so 20% of that whole reef was living hermatypic coral, like we talked about last night. And now, unfortunately, it's an average of about 16 or 17% coral cover. So we have gone down about 3 to 4% of corals on our reef. So unfortunately, there are some corals dying on Cayman's coral reefs. You also wanted to know how many types of corals there are. Well, I guess that depends on how specific you want to get. We have about 47 different species or different kinds of corals, but those corals also belong to genus or larger groupings and families. Or you can talk about them being differently built corals, branching corals with big fingers, or big mounding corals like brain corals. Many different types of corals here in the Cayman Islands. Your next question was from Tanya Harris, and Tanya, I believe you're one of the teachers that was asking on behalf of some of your students, and the next 4 questions are from your students. You wanted to know, how can you tell the genders of your fish at home? And that can be very difficult. There are some fish that will start out as one gender, and then they change their gender entirely throughout their life cycle. So it can be really hard to tell. Also, some fish will lay eggs. Then you kind of know which one is a male or a female. But then you also have some fish like a seahorse, where the female lays the eggs and then the male actually raises them. So it can be quite confusing in some of your aquaria fish to be able to really tell the difference without actually going inside the fish's body, which of course you're not going to do while the fish is living in your aquarium. Your next question was, how many different species of coral are there? And I believe I sort of already mentioned this one, so we'll just leave it at 47 different species on Cayman's coral reefs. Your next question was, how do sharks reproduce and what do sharks eat? Well, sharks eat many things. There are some sharks which eat sea turtles, some sharks eat fishes, and some sharks, believe it or not, eat crustaceans like the queen conch or lobster. So sharks eat a lot of things, but usually they're not herbivores. They're not eating marine plants. And how do they reproduce? Well, that also depends on the species or the kind of shark. Some sharks will reproduce like many other animals where there's a male and a female, and they have to mate in order to have, in order for the female to develop inside an embryo, which eventually she will birth. Or there are some sharks that lay eggs as well. So there's several different ways that sharks can reproduce. I think that was the last the last question from Tanya in your class were, why are sharks important to us? And that's an excellent question. If you guys want to know more about this, I really encourage you to contact our Department of Environment of the Cayman Islands, and especially Shark Conservation Cayman, as they're doing so much work to educate us on why sharks are important. But I can tell you right now, they really control the rest of the reef health on a coral reef as the apex predator, helping to keep all of the sick animals off the reef, helping to keep those next animals down the food chain called mesopredators in check from becoming overpopulated, which would kind of reflect on the rest of the food chain a kind of cascading effect where they'd be eating too much of the next fish. So really they keep this whole ecosystem in a pretty good balance. So they're very important to us. Now the next questions are still from Edna Moyle, but a different class. Zyron wanted to know, what is a lettuce coral? You may have seen me, Zyron, during the dive yesterday, point out a lettuce coral behind me. Lettuce corals are a hermatypic coral or a stony building coral that are quite common on our reefs, and they look kind of like a lettuce leaf, so that's why they're called lettuce coral. They come in many different colors, and I believe the one that I pointed out to you on yesterday's dive, if you want to watch that footage again, was an orangey gold color, and it was sort of halfway up the reef. So keep an eye out for those lettuce corals when you're snorkeling, or if you're a diver as well. Aiden wants to know, does coral have a way of protecting itself? And they do. Now, corals don't really affect humans so much, but they do need to protect themselves from corallivores, or animals that eat corals. And how they do this is they have a very teeny tiny cell called a nematocyst that has almost a little harpoon-like mechanism inside that shoots out to sting you when it comes into contact with you. Now again, this is so small, it really doesn't harm us humans. However, other animals that are smaller or maybe are more sensitive, it's the way the corals can defend themselves against those predators. Other animals that are related to corals also have these nematocysts or harpoon-like cells, like jellyfish and sea anemones. The next question was from Austina, and she wanted to know, do stingrays eat turtles? Stingrays do not eat sea turtles. One animal that we do see on the reef very rarely, but when we do, it is awesome, is a tiger shark. So we do occasionally have tiger sharks coming into the Cayman Islands, and they will eat our sea turtles. But stingrays, they're eating things in the sand, like little clams or shrimp and things like that that have an exoskeleton or a hard shell, and then they can crunch it really hard with their grinding plates that they have in their mouth. Next question was from Cameron, and Cameron wanted to know why it's important that we learn about the ocean and the coral. Cameron, I could go on forever about why it's so important for you to learn about this environment and the ocean and our coral reefs. But especially for you students, this is your home. This is right in your backyard. So really, you knowing and understanding the importance of this ecosystem so that you can spread that knowledge around to everybody else you meet who maybe isn't lucky enough to live in a place like this is super important. I talked a little bit about why coral reefs are important in yesterday's broadcast, so maybe you can watch that again and then send us any other questions you have about why they're important to us. Next question was from Ray J, and Ray J wanted to know if it's okay for us to touch a shark or a coral. Ray J, I'm gonna say that if that did happen, I really don't think it would hurt you. However, we should never touch anything in the ocean. The ocean is a separate environment from us here on land, but everything living in there demands respect. So we want to go into the ocean, admire its beauty, admire the coral reef, learn about it, educate others about it, but leave it as pristine as we found it. You may have heard the saying, take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but footprints in the sand. That's exactly what you should be doing on our coral reefs and to the animals living on them, including sharks. All right, and the last question was from Emma at Edna Moyle Primary School. And Emma wanted to know, how long do some sharks live? And I gotta tell you, Emma, recently there was an article out about a Greenland shark that was living over 100 years old, 400 years old. That is an old shark. This is very recent research, a new discovery, so we're constantly learning new lessons about these sharks out there. So if you're interested in them, again, I encourage you to look up Shark Conservation Cayman or look up at the DOE on their website for more shark facts, but they can get pretty old. All right, you guys had some excellent questions and so many of them, so clearly you were really stoked about our broadcast and really interested, and we really love to hear that. So I hope that means that you'll join us for our next Reefs Go Live on April 11th. Until then, let us know if you have any other questions and keep studying hard, and we'll see you then. Bye, guys.